So to get started on this gimbal clock, I need to mount a MDF disc to the lathe. I'll just use my faceplate. I've just cut out a disc, went ahead and drew a circle on here so I can line up my faceplate. It's just going to be a sacrificial disc that I can use for mounting. Then I can screw this on the lathe. To attach both the inner and outer rings to the lathe, I'm going to use double stick tape. So with a 3-inch strip, I can pretty much go corner to corner. It crosses where the ring is going to be. So I make sure that I've got enough tape to hold this on the lathe. And by putting it at 45 degrees, it minimizes the chance of splitting this ring when I go to pry it off. Now to mount it to this MDF disc, I'm going to use the center point from when I bandsawed this out. And I'll just use my tailstock to help me align it. And then use it as a clamp to press the two firmly together. Doesn't matter that the tape's sticking out a little past. I'll remove the tailstock, get that out of my way. So I'll begin turning the inside of the ring. I'll hollow it out using a square nose scraper. Technically, the square nose scraper that I prefer for this task is a Badan. It's 3/8 of an inch wide, 3/8 of an inch thick. And it works really well for a variety of tasks. I use it in many cases where you would use other tools. The cuts that I'm going to make, the tool needs to be parallel to the axis of the lathe. So I need to look over the top, compare the handle to the ways of the bed, but I also need to compare the height of the handle and keep the handle level. Initially, I need to cut on the center line so I can cut the center, but as I move out in diameter, I'll need to raise the tool rest and cut up above center, keeping that tool parallel to the axis of the lathe at all times. I'm pushing straight in towards the spindle. If you notice, even though I'm pushing in, the tool tends to cut towards the right. That's because it hits the back edge of the scraper. That's the reason that as you get larger in diameter, you need to raise the tool rest. I haven't gone all the way through the blank yet, but I am going to widen it out just so I can see what I'm doing a little more. So I've raised the tool rest now. Each cut I'm simply pushing the scraper in towards the headstock. Getting hard to get to the center. I need to make the hole a little bit wider. Raise the tool rest again. You can actually hear and feel when you break through to the MDF. It's okay to cut into the MDF, but ideally you don't want to turn the MDF. Now I've reached all the way through, so now I should be able to make single cuts. Just plunge all the way through. Stop and check your progress. I find it best to look directly over the top of the lathe at the tool and compare that to the bedways. That tells me if the tool is straight. I want to hollow this to a diameter of 3 3/4. I'm just going to use a pair of calipers. I'm going to go ahead and set them at 3 3/4. I can scribe a line. I'm only touching the point on the left that's sitting down on the tool rest. And then I'm able to put the other point very close. That's almost 3 3/4. I can darken that line with a pencil. That'll give me a good visual reference for where to stop. As I get close to my pencil line, I want to verify that I am in fact cutting a true cylinder. I don't want that to be flared or tapered in either direction. So I have a couple of ways that I can measure that. One way is using inside calipers. So you can adjust a pair of inside calipers just until they fit. And then you can slide them in. They're a little tight there, so I'll adjust them down here. Pull it out. Just that little bit of wiggle. I'm just a little bit tapered, a little bit smaller down here than I am here. So I can try to make those adjustments. But if you don't have inside calipers, you can use outside calipers. I've bandsawed this round. It's not a perfect circle. It's not running perfectly true at the moment. That's okay. But I did make sure that my bandsaw is cutting square. And so I know that this edge, this surface, is 90 degrees to my MDF plate there. So I know that's my true cylinder. So I can use a pair of outside calipers and adjust them till they just fit. It's a little tight down here, so we'll loosen them up a little bit. We get the same result here. We can see we're just a little tapered, so we're a little bit wider opening here than we are down here. So I'll just try to compensate for that. My last couple of cuts. Double check my progress again. Still just Just a tiny bit tapered. Hopefully on my last cut I can get that good and straight. Nice and straight. Now to turn the outside of the ring. To trim the outside of the ring smooth and true and to the correct size, I'm going to use a spindle detail style gouge. It has a shallow flute with a fingernail grind. The key here is that I'm going to want to roll the flute over and close it off most of the way. I want the bevel on the end of the tool to be parallel to this outside surface that I'm cutting. And as I start cutting, you'll be able to see that that bevel rubs up against that surface. So initially, if I just lay it up against here, real light pressure, I can kind of eyeball and I actually look directly over. Actually look over the top, verify that the bevel is parallel to that surface. Then I'll slide the tool over. And I'm actually going to push in a straight line with the handle. But because the bevel is at an angle, it's going to cause it to cut parallel to the bevel, not parallel to the direction I'm pushing. It's kind of like working with a chisel. So I'm pushing straight in line with the shaft of the tool, yet it's cutting parallel to the bevel. Now what you will notice is that each time you're going to cut into that MDF slightly, and that little cut there, it will dull this almost instantly. So each cut I make, I'm going to go back to the grinder, sharpen the tool, then come back and make another cut. All right, sharpened the tool. I'll do the same thing. You can just lay the bevel up against that surface. Those two are parallel. I'll slide the tool over. As soon as I touch the wood, I'm pushing with my right hand. Only pushing with my right. My left hand is just putting pressure down on the tool rest. That looks good. Diameter's pretty good. So now to mark the drilling locations, I'm going to utilize the lathe's indexing system. The first thing is I want to position the tool rest on center line. To do that, I'm going to put the tailstock back on, and I can just use the point to gauge the height of the tool rest. That's on center. Now I'll position the tool rest up here right across the edge of the ring. And I'm going to mark 4 locations. I'm going to mark 12 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 10 o'clock. Every lathe has a little different indexing system, and they have different numbers of divisions. So this lathe, for instance, has 24 positions. So when I choose my 12 o'clock position, that's marked as 0. So I'm going to go ahead and mark a line here, just straight across. I'm going to call that my 12 o'clock position. Now I'll move the indexing system. I like to just make a little tick mark there around the edge. Helps me to make sure I didn't make a mistake. So now I want to go to the 4 o'clock position. So that's going to be, that would be 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. That would be 4 right there. That looks correct based on that tick mark. So I draw a line. I want to go to 5, 6 o'clock. So this should be exactly opposite this line. That looks correct. Now 10 o'clock. So that's going to be 7, 8, 9, and 10 o'clock right there. Now that I've got the positions marked around the edge, I want to mark the face. So I'll just connect these lines, use a straight edge here. Now I need to mark around the circumference at the halfway point. So I'm just going to measure 3/4 of an inch. This ring was 1.5 inches wide. Hold my pencil there and draw a line all the way around. Then I'm going to use a center punch. I'm going to mark each drilling location where the two lines meet. I'll do that for all 4 locations. Now I can sand the outer edge and inner side of the ring, but I don't want to sand the face because I do want these pencil lines for drilling later. Right, with the ring sanded, I'll just take a putty knife and carefully pry this off. Get rid of the tape. Now I can still use this disc to do the large ring, and I'll mount it the same way. And with the 2 positions marked 180 degrees apart, I'll draw the line across the face, then sand the inner and outer edges. So now I need to drill my holes, and I kind of have to assign my positions now. So as I look at this, I have a mark at 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock. I need to drill 3 holes smaller, 13/64ths, at these 3 positions, not the 12 o'clock. So I'm going to start with 10. So I rotate this up. I'm going to use a square. Kind of helps if you have about 3 or 4 hands, but you can do it by yourself. Just kind of hold it in place. Just lightly clamp it. Just a little bit crooked. Good and square. Looks like I'm on my mark. I'll go ahead and put a second clamp on here. Just make sure everything's tight and drill my hole. So now I'll take that loose. Just going to barely loosen that clamp. So that was my 10 o'clock position. I want to drill the same hole at 4 o'clock. So if I go back to my orientation, I've drilled a hole. There's 12 o'clock. I've done 10 and 4. Need to do the same hole at 6 o'clock. So I've switched to a 3/8 bit for the finial. That's going to be at the 12 o'clock position. I'm just going to line it up the same way I did all the other holes. That's all the holes in the small ring. So I've aligned the large ring the same as the small ring with my 2 lines square to the table. Gone ahead and drilled 1 hole. I've just switched to a countersink bit. I'm just going to countersink this for the head of the flathead screw. Rotate and do the same thing to the other one. I'm going to turn the base out of a piece that's about 3 inches square. I've just got it mounted between centers. I'm going to use a spindle roughing gouge. Just going to make it round, put a tenon on it. I'll just put a tenon on one end so it can fit in my chuck. Got it flipped around in the chuck. Just going to use a skew just to clean up this end. Get rid of the rough cut. I actually only care about the very bottom. Most of this is going to get turned away. Now I'll make a couple of reference marks. Mark the length. And now a parting tool. I want to part this end down to about 7/8 of an inch in diameter. You can stop and check your progress with your calipers, or if you're comfortable, you can use them as you're parting. Then I'll use the spindle roughing gouge, remove most of this. Just half of a cove between the first line and the end. Did most of the shaping with the spindle roughing gouge, and now I'll switch to a spindle detail style gouge. Refine this cove. That's good. Then I'll just start to part the base off. I'm not going to do it completely. I just want to start the cut. Just angle it in slightly so I have just a real light undercut. Then I want to drill a hole in the center, so I'll just get a little dimple started. Got a drill chuck, the correct size drill bit mounted up. Usually drill a little slower, just keep from burning too much. And back it out frequently to clear the chips. Now my drill bit won't reach all the way through this entire blank, but the finished piece is only 3 inches tall, so it will reach to where I've parted. So that's deep enough. Just do a little sanding on the base before I part it off. And now I can part the base off. I just have my parting tool angled just slightly so it undercuts the base a little bit. Then remember that there is a hole through there. Do a little sanding on the bottom and countersink that hole. Just take a drill with a countersink bit and just countersink that for the screw. So for the smaller finial blink, I switched my jaws on my chuck to a little bit smaller size. I can just grip this 1-inch square blink right in the jaws. I'll start with a spindle roughing gouge and just round it out. You use the corners of your spindle roughing gouge, you can work right up to your chuck jaws without touching them. Now I'll just mark the lengths. So I'm going to mark everything is from the right end. So with the critical dimensions marked, I'm going to start with a V cut right here on this line. Going to make it about 1/8 of an inch deep. So then I'm just going to turn kind of half of a bead. It goes from this pencil line down to the bottom of that V groove. Just rolling and raising. Now I'm going to turn the bottom section here of the cone. And you could use other tools if you were more comfortable with a spindle gouge here. A little bump. Didn't quite go deep enough here. Now shape the top of the cone. Generally, I don't like to get rid of my pencil lines, but just on this last cut, blend those together a little bit. It's pretty good. Now I will switch over to my spindle detail gouge. Cut the little cove here. And just go from pencil line to pencil line. Try to meet in the middle nicely. Feels good. Use the parting tool here to start parting down the base. Need to make a 3/8 inch diameter tenon on the end, so I'm going to set a pair of calipers. And I know my parting tool is 1/8 of an inch wide, so if I make it about the width of 2 parting tools, it's about 1/4 of an inch. And then do a little sanding on that. Then I'll just part this off. And there's the finial. So to make the spacer washers, just got another blank here, about 1 inch square. Go ahead and round it. Want these about 7/8 in diameter, so they're going to go just under where that became round. So I'll use a parting tool here. And then you could come back with the spindle roughing gouge or a skew and just make a cylinder that's 7/8 of an inch in diameter. And if you want, you can clean up one end with a skew. Just put a little dimple to get the drill bit started nice and centered. I use the same drill bit I used before. I'll go ahead and drill an inch or so deep, make both of the pieces out of here. That should be plenty. Now I just need them 1/4 of an inch long. Lots of ways to measure this. I like just using a pair of calipers. Make a line. Just start to part it off. Give it a quick sanding. And really the only surface that matters is this here. And just finish parting that off. If you want to clean this up, you can use the skew here and again give it a nice face. Mark the length. Just start parting it and then touch it with the sandpaper. And finish parting it off. Easy peasy. So before I do any hand sanding and finishing, I wanted to go ahead and assemble this and make sure everything fits like it should. So I've got the smaller ring oriented with the finial hole at the top, that's 12 o'clock. The 2 holes I'm going to use first for mounting the larger ring, that's at 10 and 4. And I'm going to insert a binding post into each one of those holes from the inside. I'll just stick it out 1/8 of an inch or so. They're pretty tight fit through there. Then I'll insert the spacer washers through there, and I can just bring them flush. Then I can place that inside my outer ring. If this is a little too snug, I could take those spacer washers and flatten them just a little bit with some sandpaper on the bench. You can just look down through the hole and see that it's kind of lined up and push it on through. It'll line up into the outer hole. Do the same thing with the other one. And then there's a little flathead screw. For the final assembly, I would use just a little bit of Loctite or CA glue on the screw there so that it doesn't come unthreaded while this pivots. Just really where it touches snug, no more. Like I said, with a little CA glue or Loctite, that'll allow that to rotate without the screw rotating. So that fits up pretty well. I'll attach the base. So I'm going to pivot, stick the binding post through the hole on the inside, down, go through the base, then use my long screw at the bottom. I do the same thing on this one. A little bit of Loctite or CA glue there for final assembly. I'll go ahead and push the clock in now. Just try to line up 12 o'clock with the top. Push that in. And then my finial, that would get glued into the top. But that's a good snug fit. Everything fits like it should. So a little bit of hand sanding and finish. This clock will be ready for use.